Hey, good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us on the Garden Hour with Emu Extension. We're so glad that you're able to join us. My name is Donna Offenberg. I'm out of the Cape Girardeau area, southeast portion of the state. We have lots of great information, lots of great pictures to show you. Definitely keep sending in those questions and those pictures. We get to the state map. There we go. So look around that state map, see who is closest to you as a specialist, and that is your go-to person if you have any questions throughout the week or anytime during the gardening season. If that opening is vacant, just look to the next area and go to that person. Other horticulture specialists joining us today is Jennifer Shooter, Kathy Meacham, Patrick Byers, Kelly McGowan, Robert Balick, Tamara Rial, and Manoj Chetri. From the state office, we have Jared Fogue, Hong Tian, Pat Guinan, Dave Trinkline, and then Kathy has changed her name to Ask Your Questions Here. So if anytime during this program that you have questions, you can go to your chat and direct your questions to her. Just look for Ask Your Questions Here. We are going to start with the weather report. So Pat, take it away.
Sounds good. Thank you, Donna, and good afternoon, everyone. Well, we're a third of the way through the year, and it's off to a cool and wet start here in Missouri. And last month was no exception to the rule. On the upper left, these are the April departure from normal temperatures across Missouri. Coldest temperatures and largest departures are across the northern half of the state, anywhere from about 2 to 4 degrees below average, and then a little bit more moderation as you go through southern Missouri, but nonetheless still below average, generally running about 1 to 3 degrees below average. So a cool April indeed, and even the first few days of May for that matter. Lower left does show the trend over the past 4 months. You can see 3 out of the past 4 months have been cooler than average. January, February, and April had a little bit of a bump of milder conditions during the month of March. In the upper right, this is precipitation. It's been very wet across much of the state. You can see especially the southeastern half. These are departure from normal precipitation for the month of April, anywhere from some extreme wetness here in southeastern Missouri across the Boot Heel. Some big departures, 1 to 3 inches above average. Drier conditions, and I put drier in quotes because with the cool conditions and a wet March, we still had somewhat wetter conditions across the northwestern half of the state, but it is indeed saturated across much of Missouri. Wettest conditions again across the southeastern half of Missouri, where precipitation in April was above average. Here in the lower right, you can see how wet it's been during the first 4 months of the year. A little dry in January, but 3 months in a row with very wet conditions. February, March, and April all running above average. The past week was pretty much, spot on with what we've been experiencing over the past few months. A very wet week across Missouri. These are radar estimates on the left. Anything in yellow is 2 or more inches, according to the radar estimates. And you could see a good portion of Missouri, western, into parts of eastern, northeast, even in northwest Missouri. They had some big totals up here in Atchison County, over 3 to 4 inches over the past 7 days. So again, very wet conditions, perhaps a few dry pockets right around St. Louis. Drier, again, in quotes, maybe around a ½ inch or so. And the driest conditions are in the southern tip of the Boot Heel, but most of the state saw some decent rainfall, anywhere from 1 to 3 to even 4 inches localized. On the right, these are rain gauge reports using the Kokoraz network. We have a robust network of observers. Over 300 observers report pretty much on a daily basis. And you can see some of the rain gauge totals. They match up well with what the radar estimates are showing. So in the wettest areas over the past week across west central Missouri, here in Boone County, very wet conditions. We've had 2 to 3, even up to near 4 inches in parts of mid-Missouri. So again, very wet conditions. Soil temperatures really haven't changed that much over the past week. Last week, they've been running pretty similar to what we're seeing over the past 7 days. At the 2-inch depth under bare soil, generally running in the low to mid 50s across northern Missouri, mid to upper 50s, even lower 60s across southern parts of the state, and warmest conditions here in the low to mid 60s across the boot heel. In the middle, the red line is what we've been witnessing over the past 10 days or so. You can see the up and down nature. It's moderated somewhat, running slightly below average over the past few days. The blue line is the long-term trend over the past couple of decades. So we're running slightly below in that category. And then just from about 15 minutes ago, again, somewhat generally in the 50s across the state, the 2-inch bare soil temperature, warmer soils across southeast Missouri running into the middle 60s. We are under one more wet spell, at least over the next 24 to 48 hours across the state. Here in the upper left, you can see we have a system in Texas that's going to move east-northeast today, start impacting our weather across the state. It's already impacting southwest Missouri with showers and thunderstorms moving through the area as I speak. Those will translate east and northeastward across the state as we go into the afternoon, and especially tonight. Multiple rounds of showers and thunderstorms are expected. And we'll have to keep an eye out for some potential flooding. Here in the lower left, these dark green counties in southwest Missouri, that's a flood watch. And that's for the anticipation of flash flooding potential over the next, especially 24 hours. This is in effect until tomorrow afternoon. And so with already rivers and streams that are bank full, some are even already out of their banks, it won't take much water to translate to some flooding potential. That any rain that does fall from up above will actually translate to runoff that will even rise those rivers and streams even quicker and faster, or quite quickly if they're not already out of the floods in flood stage. But just keep an eye out in southwest Missouri for the potential for some flash flooding over the next 24 hours or so. Temperatures today are gonna, with the clouds and rain moving in, they won't get out of the 60s, I would say, for high temperatures. Then you can see for tomorrow morning's low, generally in the 50s, of course, with clouds and rain, those low temperatures won't go very far. And then high temperatures here across northern Missouri in the 60s tomorrow, perhaps upper 60s, mid-Missouri, and then more in the warm air sector, perhaps getting into the mid 70s, even though I see an 80-degree temperature down here near the boot heel. So some warmer conditions tomorrow, especially across the southern half of the state. Lows on Friday morning, again in the 50s. As that system begins to move out, temperatures will be a little bit cooler on Friday, with highs generally across the state in the 60s, maybe some 70s in southeast Missouri. It really looks like a nice Mother's Day weekend shaping up for Saturday and Sunday, finally getting to see some sunshine, little to no chances for precipitation. Saturday, perhaps the pick day, even warmer conditions on Mother's Day. So look at these high temperatures, more seasonable, highs in the upper 60s to lower 70s on Saturday, and then warming to above average on Mother's Day with highs in the mid 70s to lower 80s across southern Missouri. So some very mild conditions. I do want to note there is a severe weather potential here for tomorrow, especially across southern parts of Missouri. So please keep an eye out there for some big thunderstorm potential across the southern third of the state. Highest likelihood for severe weather will be in Arkansas. This is a forecast of precipitation over the next 3 days, mostly falling today through Friday morning. Again, look at all this rainfall across much of the middle part of the country. 1 to 3 inches are common or anticipated, especially across parts of Oklahoma and into southwest Missouri. That's why we see that flood watch through tomorrow afternoon. You know, these are pretty general amounts that localized areas could pick up more, as much as 4 to 5 inches, not out of the question. Hopefully it won't happen, but with the potential for some heavy thunderstorms, especially across southwest Missouri, we're gonna have to keep an eye out for that. Overall, it does look like perhaps 1 inch to 1.5 inches for much of Missouri picking up over the next few days with this system moving through. We're going to see a big pattern change starting on Sunday, Mother's Day, with highs in the 80s. Those warm temperatures are going to stick around. It's going to feel like summer as we go into early and middle part of next week. There is a high likelihood. The forecast models are indicating some continuity in what they're forecasting, a high likelihood of above normal temperatures, greater than a 80 to 90% chance that they think this forecast will verify right here in this deepest shading of red. High temperatures for early to the middle part of next week could be well into the 80s. I wouldn't be even surprised to see perhaps even some lower 90s. That's highly unusual for this time of year. That's a summer-like pattern, and that's what they're forecasting for next week. We just really haven't seen that yet this year for that extended amount of time, with high temperatures well into the 80s and perhaps even touching 90 degrees in some locations. It'll feel more humid starting on Sunday with dew points climbing into the 60s, and then well into the 60s for Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. It is going to feel like summer next week. On the right, there is a forecast of above normal precipitation, perhaps middle to later part of next week, across much of the northern plains. That clips the northwestern part of northwestern half of Missouri. So perhaps some more showers and thunderstorms as we go into next week. Again, May is our wettest month climatologically. So even near normal conditions anticipated still translates to about 1.25 inches of precipitation, drier conditions as you go across the eastern part of the country. So it does, once we get past these next couple of days of wet weather, it looks like we will have some drying opportunities with warmer conditions, more sunshine. That'll increase the evaporation rates of the soils. And so hopefully we'll have some more drying opportunities, especially this weekend and into the early and middle part of next week. Donna, that's pretty much a weather report. I'll hand it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer as your moderator.
Thank you, Donna. Well, our fruit trees have been in bloom, and here in northern Missouri, they're still in bloom. And hopefully we'll have a good fruit crop this year. But sometimes our fruit trees need to be thinned, and Patrick Byers is going to talk about light thinning of peaches.
Okay, can you hear me, Jennifer?
Yes, I can.
Okay, let me go ahead and bring up the presentation. All right, are we seeing the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, fabulous. Well, peaches, of course, are a popular fruit crop here in the Midwest. And in years past, I used to manage a peach orchard. And boy, March and April were always very stressful months because you never knew when you would get an unseasonably late frost that might damage or even destroy the peach crop. But in those years where we had a crop of fruit on the trees, then the stress began in May, because this is the point where we need to be thinking about thinning the fruit. Now, peaches are prolific. They set lots and lots and lots of fruit. And if you have a full crop of fruit on your tree, especially if it's been several years since you've seen a full crop of fruit on your tree, it can be very difficult to bring yourself to go out and pull 9 out of 10 of the peaches off the tree. But this is what you need to do. This is what we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about thinning peaches. So let's take a quick look at the thoughts behind thinning peaches and the process. So why would you consider thinning peaches? Well, if you don't thin peaches, there can be problems. I mean, there's some definite goals of thinning peaches, and certainly to improve fruit quality and to develop larger fruit. But the biggest deal related to thinning peaches is to reduce limb breakage. If we look at this lower picture here, you can see the result of allowing too much fruit to remain on the tree. Peach wood is brittle, and the weight of the accumulated weight of too much fruit can actually break trees down, break branches, or even sometimes break entire trees. So definite benefits for thinning peaches from the standpoint of fruit quality, but also just to keep your trees in good health and to reduce limb breakage. Now, thinning actually begins with pruning. And if we look at this picture here, we can see a branch on a peach tree. We can see the small branches that grew last year. We got to keep in mind that peaches only flower and set fruit on the shoots that grew last year. And in this case, there were a number of small shoots that grew in this part of the tree. And each one of those small shoots has a number of fruit on it. We can see that clearly in this picture. And yes, we could go in and hand thin all of that off, but it's actually much easier to prune off these very small twigs when you're pruning the tree. And by doing so, you remove some of the excess fruit at that point. It's much easier, much more practical, much more efficient from the standpoint of thinning to remove this fruit by pruning off these branches than to come back later on and try to remove the fruit. Always have questions about thinning blossoms. And certainly a person could thin off a portion of the crop by removing some of the blossoms, but that's risky in Missouri. Peaches bloom typically towards the end of March, early April, well before our last predicted frost date. And there can be situations where we have a mild frost that might remove just a portion of the crop, and still leave plenty of peaches. But if we've already previously removed flowers and then we have a frost, it can actually remove everything that's left. Keep in mind, we really only need about 10% of the blossoms on a tree to actually set into fruit to have a good crop of peaches. But if we've removed a portion of the flowers and then frost removes an additional portion of the flowers, it can lead to a situation with a short or a lost crop. So typically in Missouri, we don't thin blossoms. We focus on thinning fruit. Now, when is the best time to thin fruit? Well, if you watch peaches, as soon as the flowers are pollinated and the petals drop, we begin to see development of the tiny fruit. And it happens quick. Within 2 to 3 weeks, we can have a situation from a peach blossom to a fruit that's ready to thin, especially if the weather's warm. Now, as Pat mentioned, we had a fairly cool April, and the process was slowed down to some degree, but we want to keep an eye on the fruit. So after flowering, the fruit begins to grow, and we get to a point that's called shuck split. And if we look at this picture, we can see what shuck split is all about. The shuck is actually a portion of the blossom that remains behind after the petals drop. And as the little peach expands, at some point it splits the shuck and the shuck falls off. And looking at this picture here in the very center, we see 2 peaches that still have the shucks attached and 1 peach where the shuck has fallen off. This is a good benchmark from the standpoint of when you should start thinning. At this point, you can clearly see which peaches are going to stay behind on the tree, and you can thin accordingly. You want to get your thinning done reasonably early, though. If you wait too long and if the fruit gets too large, you don't see as much benefit from the standpoint of improvement in fruit quality. Yes, you can reduce that issue related to limb breakage, but if you thin early, you'll see the added benefit of larger, better quality peaches. So try to get your thinning done before the fruit is larger than a quarter. Most thinning takes place in the first 2 weeks of May here in Missouri. So that's a time to be thinking about. But again, it varies from year to year based upon when the trees were in blossom and how warm it is in April. It's also a good practice to save your thinning for dry days. You know, thinning, you unavoidably will damage some of the fruit that you leave behind. And if you have several days of dry weather for that fruit to heal, you're less likely to have issues with the diseases that attack peach fruit. So thin on a dry day and try to find a day to thin where it's not going to rain for several following days. Now, as far as the actual process of thinning, what we're doing is we're removing excess fruit. And as I said before, you can take 9 out of 10 peaches off of a peach tree that has a full crop on and still have a good crop of good quality fruit and reduce limb breakage. But if you want to get down to sort of the scientific basis of thinning, if you thin your fruit to 8 to 12 inches apart, that's about the density that you want, because a peach fruit requires a certain number of leaves that are photosynthesizing and developing foodstuffs that will then move into the developing fruit. And that's typically around 20 leaves. So if we take a look at this picture here, every place that there's a red arrow, that is where we're going to leave that developing peach on the plant. We try to place these peaches in the lower sections of long branches. This branch is about 2 feet long. And notice that we're kind of moving our fruit down towards the base of the branch. If we had kept a fruit on the very tip of the branch, there's a good likelihood that as that peach got larger, it might even break that branch off because or at least the tip of that branch off. So try to place your fruit towards the base of the branch. Try to place your fruit in the sun. Sun-exposed fruit is better quality fruit. So given a choice, try to select those peaches that will develop in the sun. And by this point in the development of the young peaches, you can usually see if there's been any damage to that fruit from stink bugs or tarnished plant bugs or physical damage or whatever it might be. And you can selectively remove those damaged fruit as you thin. So here's our diagram. These are the peaches that we're leaving. These are the peaches that are coming off. And notice that we're keeping 3 fruit on that branch, but we're taking 14 fruit off. So again, peaches are so prolific. Don't be afraid to thin and thin heavily. And in fact, this is what the ground should look like under your peach tree when you're done thinning. In a commercial orchard, it's somewhat of a brutal operation. Farmers will beat their trees with padded sticks, rubber hoses, ropes to knock off the excess fruit. But in the home orchard, we have the ability to go out and do this by hand. We can go through and thin by hand. My advice, thin your peaches and then come back a week later and thin them again, because very few people do a thorough, adequate job the first go round. So go around or take off the fruit initially and then come back and thin additionally, because there's always peaches you miss or for whatever reason, but you definitely want to get the job done before the peaches reach the size of a quarter. There are horticultural specialists across Missouri that are happy to help with questions related to peach culture. So please reach out to any of the horticulturists in your area. If your county is in a part of the state that has an open position, find a specialist close by, and I'm sure they'll be happy to help. Jennifer, that's what I have.
All right, great information, Patrick. Well, our next question is also about fruit, and the question came into us, and it is, I have a question about my new strawberry plants. I see something eating the leaves, and there appears to be some tiny eggs on the undersides of the leaves. Do you know what this could be? And is there something organic I could put on them to stop the damage? And Donna's going to talk about this question.
So a couple of us have chatted back and forth about this. We believe that the holes may be slug or snail damage. I do know that there's a little grub that gets on roses that are called rose slugs that is something similar, can also get on strawberry leaves, but likely it is the slugs or the snails cutting the holes, which would be on the left-hand side. Now the right-hand side, it's hard to determine what is exactly going on with the picture on the right. It could be aphids. There's a little parasitic wasp that comes along and stings an aphid, lays an egg in it, and then the aphid swells up and becomes a cream to a pearl-looking color. And that might be what's happening. I don't know for sure unless we actually have the leaves to examine in the office. These are not eggs. That's most likely some type of insect, if it's not an aphid. Now, as an organic remedy, one thing about snails and slugs, we have been really wet this year. And when we get the ground saturated and it just stays wet all the time, we're bound to see the snails and slugs and have quite a few of them. And so airing out or pulling away some of that excess mulching that might be under those plants, if you have any leftover straw or leftover wood chips or whatever you mulched with, that can help. Getting that canopy dried out, that will help. As far as insects, if it truly is insects, even on the right-hand side, as well as the left-hand side, a good organic remedy is just good old insecticidal soap, and that might be the safest way to go about this. And that's all I have, Jennifer. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Donna. Now we're going to move into a lawn question or a lawn topic, and that is weeds. We've talked about weeds for the past few weeks, and we're going to be dealing with weeds all gardening season. So today we're going to talk about dandelions, creeping Charlie, and white clover. And I'm going to turn it over to Manoj to tell us about those weeds.
Actually, before we get there, Jennifer, can I interrupt? We were going to do a poll to see how people like to do their lawns. Is that okay if okay, I'm going to launch the poll. You should be able to see this. So we have 3 different choices. Are you a pure lawn person? Do you like to have flowers in there for the pollinators? Are you somewhere in between? I'll give you just a few seconds to do this. All right, 5 more seconds to put in your vote, and then I'm going to close the poll. All right, here we go. Closing the poll. And then I'm going to share the results. So it looks like we have some of everybody. We have some that like to have a pure lawn. We have some that are all for pollinator friendly lawns. And then we have a lot of people who are in between. All right, I'm going to stop there and hand it back over to Manoj.
Hey, Chandra, thank you. Wow, that's I was a little bit surprised there. So today I'm going to talk about broadleaf weeds. I can see people something in between. So yes, I can understand people, are not very much bothered by, few here and there weeds in their lawns, and maybe I didn't want to go and deal with these herbicides a lot because that's a lot of work in the first place. And the second place, there's a lot of ecosystems and ecology and sustainability going on. But I didn't expect it 33% of pollinator friendly lawn, and that's a very good thing to know. However, today my topic is more towards how to get rid of these broadleaf weeds, dandelions, white clover, and ground ivy in your home lawns. So let's go into that. But just before moving into that control and management, I just wanted to give you a heads up here. Again, the same thing, echoing the same thing, that for not many people, the weeds that we consider like dandelions and clovers, they may not be a weeds, or they may not be bothered, as they are a wonderful natural habitat for many of the insect pollinators like bees, especially in the springtime where there is not much flowers. The dandelions and clovers, these are the first things in our homes that attract these pollinators. Actually, we have a next sessions, our colleague Robert going to talk about that more in detail. I will just want to move on to how to get control of these weeds and manage in our home lawns. Start with the dandelions. So all of us are very familiar with these weeds because it's a common one, easy to identify, the low growing weeds. The leaf blades are very unique in shape. It has a tooth on its leaves, easy to identify. Also with the flowers, bright yellow petals. And at this time of the year, this is the flowering time until early summer. And we can see these all over the yard. This is a perennial weed. Mowing, of course, has minimal effect on dandelions because this has very deep growing taproot beneath the soil. And even if you try to remove by some hand tools, you may not remove all of the roots, and so they can come back from that deep root system. So there are some specialized hand tools you can use to, if there are a few weeds in your yard, you can have your kids and some workout in hand digging the deep taproot of dandelions and get rid of dandelions if this is quite in manageable populations. But the problem with the dandelions is they spread by seeds, and the seeds are very the dandelions are very prolific seed producers, as they can produce thousands of seeds from single plants, and they can travel several miles. For the time's sake, I just want to move on straight into the herbicides options. For some reason, I'm not able to slide. Okay. So for the herbicide options, as I have talked before, the best approach is to use pre-emergent. This will stops from new seedlings emerging from the seeds. Dandelions, what it does is that the seeds of dandelions, they actually do not go dormant. They can germinate in any time of the year, in fall, in the spring, in summer. If they have a good 55 degree Fahrenheit temperature, they can germinate. So you can see that why it is a problem. But you can spray pre-emergent herbicide like Dimensions or Gallery in the springtime or in fall time, more preferably in the springtime before they produce flowers. If you can time that, then you can get good control of the pre-emergent herbicide. But once it germinates, then also you have a post-emergent herbicide options. The most familiar one is 2,4-D, dicamba, available as ortho weed killers. Again, with the post-emergent herbicides, if you are spraying that once the flowers are up or once the petals are removed and you can see the white bloom, the herbicides may not work at that time because now the dandelions have already a deep root systems developed. And at this point, the herbicides are not going down to the roots. They are going just above the shoot systems, are more so in the flowering part. So that will not work because your herbicide is supposed to go down to the root systems and kill that. So typically we recommend applying post-emergent herbicide in fall time when the dandelions is young, or early spring as soon as you see the dandelions. And then the options are dicamba and 2,4-D. Let's move to the next weed, and this is white clover. Again, another pretty common weed, easy to identify. It's a perennial weed. It spreads by stolons. It has a stolon, so that's why it takes over your lawn pretty quickly, and also germinates from seeds every year. Again, the mowing does not have a very great effect on this in terms of damaging the weeds, because it has a very low growing point. It forms a low, dense, thick mat as it overtakes. And one of the interesting thing about the white clover is they thrives very well in under-fertilized lawn, particularly nitrogen deficient lawn, because they have their own system or mechanism to fix the nitrogen and provide nitrogens from the atmosphere. So one of the strategies to manage white clover will be to apply a little bit of nitrogens early in the season. For the cool season like fescue, you can start 1 pound of nitrogens per 1,000 square feet. That will help give some nutrient to your lawn and compete against white clover. Pre-emergent herbicide will be the starting point again to manage any weeds, including white clover. Options will be dimensions and gallery or barricade, and you have to apply them again at the same time as you apply for your crabgrass, or weeks after that. But once you see these white clovers in your lawn, the pre-emergent herbicide will not work. You have to go for the post-emergent herbicides. For the white clover, dicamba is one of the most effective and popular one. Your ortho weed killer has dicamba. Triclopyr is another herbicide which is very effective against clover. There are other options like Trimec, Speedzone. These are a little bit premium products because they have a different combinations of herbicides. Like they can have MCPP plus dicamba plus 2,4-D. So when you have multiple herbicides in one product, that's going to be expensive, but it does good control against white clover. And one thing I want to point out that the herbicide like 2,4-D that are used to control many of the broadleaf like dandelions or even ground ivy, it will not work for white clover. Okay, so if you have been spreading 2,4-D, and then you know the pain that it will not give you good control. For the white clover, again, I have heard many stories like I sprayed this and that, and it did some browning and wilting, but again, it came back. The reason for that is the timing of the herbicide. Again, I said briefly before, if you apply the herbicides after the flowering stage, like at this moment, we are already seeing flowers of white clovers, then all the herbicides, they do not go, or they do not reach down to the roots of the weed. Herbicides will work only if the plant itself can take that herbicides down to the root. And this happens when the weeds are growing very young. So all these weeds that you are seeing right now, the clover, dandelions, they actually germinate in fall, in September, October, they grow, they overwinter, and now they are setting flowers. So all the herbicides that you put down now, they are taken upwards towards the flowers, not towards the roots. So they are not as effective as in fall times. The best time, September, October, for post-emergent herbicides. Ground ivy, also known as creeping Charlie. This is another perennial weed, very obnoxious. This is an invasive weed. It is quite confusing for some of the homeowners. It looks close to henbit, which has purple flowers, and the flowering time it coincides. One way of identifying from or distinguishing from henbit is this ground ivy has stolons, so it spreads by stolons and seeds, whereas henbit, they do not have stolons. And henbit is not perennial, but ground ivy is perennial. Again, since it has a low growing point, prostate growth habit, mowing has minimal effect. It thrives very well in damp, sandy areas, especially under these trees where you have a hard time growing turf. This creeping Charlie takes over and it forms a dense, thick mat. It is spread by stolons and seeds. and therefore it's hard to control when something is spreading by stolons. Your pre-emergent might not be very effective because they are spreading vegetatively from stolons. But for the new seeds, you can stop them from using pre-emergent herbicides. Again, the same herbicides, pre-emergent will work. For the post-emergent, we have triclopyr and dicamba. These are available for homeowners as well. And again, with the ground IB, 240 is not as effective as triclopyr or dicamba. You can apply them again in fall, preferably in fall. In the springtime, you can get some activity, but not as much effective as in fall. So for all these 3 weeks, what I have told you is that you have to plan to spray your herbicides in fall time in early September, October, early November. And because your weeds are growing young, your herbicides will be most effective. In the springtime, you can do it, but not as good as fall time. For the ground IB, the alternative method is also available, and there's a research already shown that the borax, which has a boron, it can be effective in doing some damage to ground IB. If you mix 10 ounces of borax in 2 gallons of water and you spray uniformly over 1,000 square feet, you can get good activity because ground ivy is sensitive to boron. And their turf grass is also your tall fescue and Kentucky bluegrass. Those types of cool season, they can tolerate some level of boron, so the toxicity is not as bad as in ground ivy. But again, if you have high boron level in your soil, then you may not go to that route. But generally, your soils are not that high in boron, then you can use that borax to kill the ground ivy, as they are highly sensitive to boron. I talked about herbicide options because people like to hear about the herbicide options, but one thing you should never forget is herbicides is your last resort. You should never use that as a first tool. You always have to focus on cultural management of the weed. That's the most sustainable way to manage weeds. I have these slides in every presentations I have done, but again, I cannot emphasize more that you have to raise your mowing heights if you have a perennial weed problems. Even half an inch, quarter inch will help you to suppress the weeds, because you are encouraging your roots to grow more vigorously and deep. Proper fertilizers for the cool season lawns. Again, avoid summer fertilizers. Use start of spring fertilizers with 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, and then add another 2 pounds in September and October. Deep irrigations, no more than 1 inch of water per week. If you start watering too frequently, then that will help your weeds, because they are shallow rooted most of the time. And you want to encourage your turf grass to develop deep roots with the deep irrigations. Again, if you can manage shade, reduce shade, and also the drainage, that will help to grow your turf more dense, thick, and suppress the weeds. That will be all from my side. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Manoj. Robert is now going to tell us about Mow May.
Hello, everyone. Let's talk about Mow May. And it's interesting. This is the poll. I was kind of surprised too, Manoj, that so many people were interested in pollinator-friendly lawns. And so I want to show you, we can get this to work. This is my house in Carthage last April, a year ago last April. And the interesting thing about this is it's a zoysia grass lawn, which of course is a warm season grass. And this is April, and we see that we have all kinds of spring ephemerals coming up in the zoysia grass lawn. Now, if you have a zoysia grass lawn or know about zoysia grass lawn, it's typically a very thick lawn. And what we have with our spring ephemerals, I'm getting, my mouse is going crazy. This is what it looks like close up. We have spring beauties, we have little bluets in there, there's speedwell, henbit, dead nettle, all kinds of things going on in this lawn. And you can't see in a photo, but if you stand there long enough and look at it, you can see all kinds of little bees and flies and things buzzing around and visiting each of those flowers. And if you look closely enough, you'll see that there just might be a little bit of zoysia grass underneath that. Let's take a little closer look. And of course, there's some purple poppy mallow leaves coming through there, and some speedwell. And the zoysia itself is just barely turning green. And this is in April. The interesting thing about zoysia grass lawns is that, you know, if we get a late freeze on zoysia grass or bluegrass lawns, it can actually damage the lawn and you can get freeze damage on your lawn. But with these ephemerals in there, it almost acts as a covering for your grass, makes your grass healthier. And so I have all these are the spring beauties right here. We have all these ephemerals growing, including this dead nettle. And there's actually a cover on the lawn. The nice thing about these spring ephemerals, these annual weeds that come up every spring, actually sprout in the fall or early winter and come up and bloom at this point in April and May. And so they covered the lawn. We get a nice lawn, but after 2 mows, usually I put it off until I know the zoysia grass is nice and green and there's no chance of frost or freeze. I'll give it 2 mows and we're right back to the perfectly manicured zoysia grass lawn. But in the meantime, we get this, and we have bumblebees and we have ladybugs and we have, actually, you know, maybe you don't know this. I'm going to ask Tamara Rial, our entomologist, to contribute anytime she wants to in here, because this is all about insects on this Mow May. But there's on the henbit, it makes a little seed on each of the stems, and each seed on henbit has a little nectar drop at the base of the seed, not the flower, but the seed. They may have nectar in the flower as well, but on the seed. And so we get ant colonies, and I've seen them do this. The ant colonies will climb up. Yeah, maybe you can hear that thunder. We're having a thunderstorm right now. And they said it was going to be a wet Southwest Missouri week this week, and we're getting it. There's a droplet of nectar on the seed of the henbit. The ants will climb and pull down that seed and carry it back to their nest and harvest that sugar coating off of the seed. And that is how the henbit gets distributed around, which I found very interesting, because ants are, of course, a very good part of our ecosystem that we like to have. So it's not just butterflies and bees. There's other critters involved too that really need these types of things to have a happy life. And so here's our dandelion. We know how to kill dandelions, but did you know that some people actually buy dandelion seed and sow it in their lawn? Because dandelions, being a perennial weed, they're not the spring ephemeral annual weeds. They're a perennial weed. That means they come back every year from the same plant, and they have deep roots, as we saw in Manoj's slide, and that helps aerate the ground and is actually a good natural way to do that. Plus, there's lots of other benefits for dandelions. Now I had to put this in. This is my zoysia grass lawn, okay? And this is a spot that doesn't have many ephemerals in it in spring, but you can see these hyacinths are blooming. And it's at the same time, and of course we get a nice fragrance from hyacinths, and pollinators visit those as well. So you don't have to just go with the natural plants that might come up. Of course, I didn't plant any of those spring ephemerals. They come up on their own. But these hyacinths can be planted, and of course they come up and bloom, and they're nice fragrance. And by the time those flowers are done, the zoysia grass will be greened up and ready to mow, and we can just mow right over the top of that as well. And in Carthage, where my office is, we have a statue of Marlin Perkins, you know, from Wild Kingdom. He's from Carthage, and there's a statue of him in the park. And it is surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of square feet, literally tens of thousands of crocus bulbs that come up in the lawn. And are great for, we see little pollinators and bees and honeybees and things there on that too. And they get mowed off after a while. So the spring Mow May has to do with that type of activity. Some folks might want to continue that on into the summer. And this is, of course, is white clover, Dutch clover, and a bumblebee. of sorts. And it's a beautiful way to perpetuate your lawn into the summer. So the question now becomes, should I not mow? Should I mow? When should I mow? How high do I mow? This casts a whole other view onto things, okay? So there's all kinds of recommendations that can be made depending on your circumstance. Now, first of all, if you're in a city like I have a house here in Springfield that has a homeowners association, and you are required to have your lawn mowed at no more than 6 inches in height. And that would wipe out almost everything that you would have on your lawn for pollinators. So if you're going to do this, make sure you have those rules in hand and know what you can get away with and what you can't. The second rule of no mow May is you may want to keep some areas mowed, but not mow other areas. You don't have to mow all your lawn at once, which I really like because I really don't like to mow all that much. So if you mow near the house, that could be good for keeping certain pests and bugs away. You know, if you don't mow your fescue lawn in the month of May and we're getting all this rain, you're going to have a very tall lawn. And there's a good chance that if you have other plants in there, like the clovers and other plants, that you will attract rabbits and possibly mice and voles. And of course, then possibly snakes and other critters too, depending on your location and how big your area is. So keep that in mind, that if you're doing a no-mow lawn, that you might still want to keep the areas near your sidewalks and your house mowed down to reduce the habitat for critters that you might not necessarily want to have there. As we continue on, I'd like you to think about one other thing here. This is the ephemeral lawn. Those are surprise lilies in the background popping up. And they'll bloom in August. But if you want to actually do something for pollinators, you can consider no mow. I consider no mow April, it might be better for us than no mow May. But by then, try to have some other plantings in your yard, in your flower gardens, that might pick up the slack for the pollinators so that you can go ahead and mow your lawn and keep it mowed. Now remember, fescue lawns, you want to mow them at about 3.5 inches. And zoysia Bermuda grass lawns are maybe 2 inches, 1.5 inches. So if you let it go for a month, you've got a tall grass. And if you come back and just mow it, it's a good chance you're going to shock your lawn, right? So you may want to consider mowing slowly, you know, put it on the highest setting when you go back and mow and wait a few days and bring it back down to where it needs to be. Otherwise, you might shock your lawn. And I want to give you some information about the no mow May anyway. We have these resources. The No Mow May is part of the Xerces Society, which is for invertebrate conservation, which is your pollinators, your bees and all that. And they have a program called Bee City USA. And that program has spawned the No Mow May initiative, which is actually started in Europe, in Britain, and is moved over here as an initiative to save pollinators. So look up these resources here. There's plenty of things you can do. I would like to say one other thing, though, that if you're considering planting pollinator-friendly wildflowers or plants into your lawn, please contact your extension agent, because some of them are not as good here as others. Now, here's an example. This is our replacing turf grass with pollinator-friendly lawn alternatives. And this is from University of New Hampshire. And so they're going to have things in there like certain clovers, which in the summertime here in Missouri would just burn up. So we want to make sure that we have more locally sourced plants for you, like these microclovers. And University of Illinois has done some research and has some varieties there for microclovers. So let's keep it close, you know, and, you know, if you're closer to Illinois or Iowa or Kansas or Arkansas, look in those universities too, but try not to just jump on the bandwagon and do something crazy, because it could end up being a disaster. But I'd like to see some no-mow lawns and see what people really have to say about them, since we have so much interest, maybe some photos somewhere would be good. Any questions on that?
Okay, thank you, Robert. Recently, Kelly received a wasabi plant, and she is going to tell us a little bit about wasabi.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. Let me get my stuff going here. All right, can you see that okay?
Yes.
All right. So yes, we're going to talk a little bit about wasabi. This is kind of an interesting plant that I didn't know a whole lot about, but I recently acquired a plant. And so I'm going to share a little bit with you about that. So most of the wasabi that you may be familiar with isn't true wasabi. 99% of the wasabi that you either buy at the store or you get in a restaurant, especially a sushi restaurant or anything like that, 99% of that is a wasabi paste. And it's basically just a combination of horseradish, ground mustard, and green food coloring. That's all it is. It certainly has a kick and, can be good and all of that, but it's not true wasabi. Real wasabi is about $10 per ounce and about $100 per pound. So it's very, very expensive, and that's why we don't see it a whole lot. So this is true wasabi, and you can see there's special graters that are used to grate the roots of the plants to make true wasabi. And I've never had it before, but the description of the flavor is that it has an intense aromatic heat that quickly subsides, giving way to a smooth, sweet finish that lingers. Boy, doesn't that sound good. So I'm kind of anxious to try it, but this is what it looks like in an authentic restaurant or in a restaurant that serves authentic wasabi. So why is it so expensive? Well, it can be extremely temperamental to grow, and it's actually considered to be one of the most difficult plants in the world to grow. So I've got my work cut out for me, but I'm certainly going to give it a try. It also requires very steady temperatures, anywhere from 50 to 60 degrees. It does not tolerate temperature fluctuations. And it also requires very consistent humidity levels as well. It also requires a semi-aquatic environment, but it won't grow in standing water. So it's kind of picky in that respect too. It needs full to part shade. And in its native habitats in Japan, it grows along spring-fed streams in heavily wooded areas. So whenever I'm visiting with someone about a plant that we're not familiar with, I always suggest going back to where that plant is native to, finding out what its native habitat is like, and then trying to recreate that if you want to grow it here. It takes about 2 years to reach a harvestable size. So that's another reason it's so expensive. It's not something you can plant, in May and harvest in August. It takes a long time to reach a harvestable size. And it needs a soil that's very rich in organic matter and also very well drained. And here's some operations in Japan. It kind of shows you how it's being grown. There's certainly some field grown wasabi and then some protected culture wasabi as well. And you can kind of see what it looks like. You can see the leaves, and then you can see the root system of the plant. And that's what's actually graded for the wasabi paste. And then this is just another picture of wasabi growing, and you can see that they have the shade cloth ready to go into place if it gets too sunny, because it does need shade. Now, as far as here in the United States, there is some research going on in the Pacific Northwest. I think it's in Oregon State. And they're actually growing it in high tunnels, and they're pretty secretive about how they're growing it. They claim to have a perfect system in place to grow it, but they don't want anyone else to know what that perfect system is. But they are starting to successfully grow it and sell that as well. So let me stop sharing, and I'm going to show you my little plant here. Okay, so this is the plant that I got yesterday. And I don't know if you can see it here, but this is the root system. And this is the part that you would actually grate to get that wasabi paste. And let's got a look, there's the fine root system. And then the leaves are kind of heart-shaped. Kind of see the leaves. This is actually a member of the cabbage family. So this guy isn't very big, and I actually bought it online, and this one plant was about $30. So I'm going to try my best to take care of it and to have some success with it. But I just love interesting plants. I like to try new things. That's one of the things I love about horticulture and gardening, is just being able to try new things like this and learn and share that knowledge with others. So Jennifer, that's all I have.
Okay, very interesting, Kelly. Thanks for sharing with us. Okay, we are almost out of time, but I think we'll do one more topic, and that is on dogwoods. And I'm going to turn it over to Kathy to talk about that.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. And how interesting, Kelly. I can't find my, oh, there we go, slideshow. Okay, so I'm in the Lexington area, which is 30, 45 minutes east of Kansas City, and the dogwood are just beautiful right now. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about the tree, and most of us know that is the Missouri state tree, and I was confused on that this morning. The hawthorn is the state flower, I believe, and so I had that confused. Anyway, it's a beautiful shrub to what I usually see them growing as small trees, and mostly in the landscapes. That's what you'll see, and in our forest. They typically grow just generally 15 to 30 feet tall and 15 to 25 feet wide. They can get taller. They're also found statewide. However, in the northern part of the state, it's a little more challenging. They're an understory tree, so they really are going to benefit from partially shaded areas and no afternoon or harsh afternoon sun that can cause leaf scorch and sun scald, and it's really hard on this tree. You find them in our landscapes, cultivated in our landscapes, and then in the forest as well. And they have 4-season interest. It's one of the reasons I love this plant so much. This tree, and so beautiful spring flowers, and the birds love it all through the spring and the summer. It has nice fall foliage and winter and fall red color, and then in the winter it has the red berries. And because of its habit, it makes an interesting tree in the winter as well. And the birds love it. If you've got one kind of dying, the woodpeckers really love it. And again, it's just one of my favorite trees, but it's hard to pick a favorite. So there's many cultivars, and they range from white to a pale pink to some brilliant pinks and bordering on red. And like I said, they grow best in a partially shaded area. They are not happy in full sun or hot, dry conditions. They do need well-drained soils, and like many of our trees and plants, other trees and plants, they can't stand wet feet or being in flooding conditions. All those pictures, I will say, are taken in the Lexington area. Not this one, but all of them are taken in the Lexington area. So there's 17 native cultivars in the United States, and there's 5 of them found in Missouri. And one of them is the flowering dogwood, the one many of us are the most familiar with. There's another one called the alternative leaf dogwood. Alternate leaf dogwood. It does have an alternate leaf. Most of them have opposite. The other dogwoods have opposite leaf, but this one does not. There's the rough leaf dogwood in Missouri, the gray dogwood, and the swamp dogwood. And as you can guess, a swamp dogwood can tolerate more water, as can the gray dogwood. And that swamp dogwood is the smallest, anywhere from 3 to 13 feet. Although as beautiful as they are, they don't come without some problems sometimes. So this is a list, and there's even more of the problems that can come with dogwood. Don't be discouraged, however, to plant one. Proper care is the number one reason you would not see these problems. So there's spot leaf anthracnose, another leaf spot. There's dogwood anthracnose, canker, a very serious disease, powdery mildew, gray mold, crown canker, dogwood borer, another one that we see. And again, there's more. But many of the problems that we see are from growing conditions. So and that's true in many plants. So incorrect care, weather extremes, soggy soil, and these are all the major cause of plant decline. You overwatering, underwatering, they're just are very hard on trees, and mulching them is one way that you can help conserve the water and the moisture content to help the plants. There are disease and borer resistant varieties, and so you could look for those if you're concerned. And I just want to mention too that many plant problems are not caused by disease or an insect. As my colleague Tamara said, insects naturally want to land on a leaf. It doesn't mean they're doing any damage. They just needed to hang out a minute and rest. I thought I had one more slide. So no, I guess that is it. So that's all for me. These are, again, pretty varieties here in Lexington.
All right, thank you, Kathy. We are out of time, so I'm going to turn it back over to Donna.
Okay, so just remember that we went back to weekly. So next Wednesday at noon, we'll be doing this again with lots of information, lots of pictures. If you have any questions in the meantime, you can go back to the original website where you registered, and you'll have to type in your question there. Don't forget that we also have this recorded, and it can be found on the YouTube page for MUIPM. I hope that everybody has a wonderful day.